And the key part of becoming a member at this church was a meeting with the pastor and his wife. And so I went with Rihanna to this meeting, and I brought with me a stack of questions. I mean, like I had printed stuff out off of the internet. I had printed stuff out off the internet. Like I wanted to debate this pastor, and I had it in my mind that if I could convince this pastor out of his Christianity, like it would be a huge win for me, debating a pastor out of his faith.
Welcome to the show today, folks. Man, I'm so excited. Y'all know that I love Stand to Reason, and got someone from Stand to Reason here, Jon Noyes. I know a lot of y'all have made a lot of comments on the episode we did with Alan Schleman from Stand to Reason. Anybody that needs resources or wants to be able to defend their faith more critically, they have some incredible great resources. Most all of them are free. You can enroll in courses, and but John's got such a powerful testimony, and I know he's going to bless you today, challenge you, and we appreciate y'all tuning in to us. So John, thanks for your time today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, it's my privilege. Thank you. Thanks for being faithful and being willing to kind of bloom where you're planted and put content out and have a diversity of different people to talk about a multiple of topics. I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, amen. Well, let's just kind of start with you, John. The viewers always like to know, how did you come to Christ? Were you brought up in a Christian family? What kind of was your background on all that? Did you go to church? Your mama drag you to church, or how did that all work out?
So I usually start my story with as all good stories start with, I met a girl. I was not raised in a Christian home. We weren't antagonistic or anything towards Christianity or religion in general, but I just didn't grow up in any type of faith tradition. And then through my experiences in high school and college, and then my young professional life, I kind of blossomed and bloomed into an atheist. I thought that naturalism, the idea that everything that exists is the product of a purely physical process, I thought that naturalism was the best explanation for the way the world really is. Now that's reality, right? The reality is the way the world really is. And I tried to live naturalism out philosophically, and out in my life, and of course leaning into science and stuff like that. And then I moved to Southern California from Washington, D.C. And my very first night in Southern California, I met Rihanna, my now wife. I met a girl, and she was incredible. And we got to know each other, and we started dating. And about maybe 3 months into dating, she told me that she was a Christian. And I was a pretty vociferous atheist. If I found out you were a Christian, I would have loved to have taken you out for coffee and discussed that with you in the hopes of, pointing out the errors of your ways. And so when she came out as a Christian, I thought, oh man, yeah, it's like the roles are reversed, right? I was evangelical atheist or evangelistic atheist, And so when Rihanna told me that she was a Christian, I was like, man, this is not good, because I also in the background thought that Christians were kind of stupid. They were uneducated. They maybe believed what they believed because it made them feel good. It helped them explain things that they couldn't explain. Gave them comfort, But I certainly didn't believe that Christians believe what they believe because it was actually true. Because I was an atheist, so I thought that I had the true story of reality. My wife ended up wanting to become a member of this church, and we weren't married yet. Rihanna, we were just dating. She wanted to become a member of this church that she had been going to. She asked me to go to church with her, and I've done crazier things for the affections of a woman. I've done much crazier things. So I said, sure, I'll go. If you hang out with me on Saturday, I'll go wherever you want on Sunday. So I went to church with her. In this church, she wanted to become a member of it. So I went with her to the membership classes, and I remember thinking they were so weird. Looking at the Christian worldview, learning about what the Bible is, what's in it, learning about this specific church, And the key part of becoming a member at this church was a meeting with the pastor and his wife. And so I went with Rihanna to this meeting, and I brought with me a stack of questions. I mean, like I had printed stuff out off of the internet. I had printed stuff out off the internet. Like I wanted to debate this pastor, and I had it in my mind that if I could convince this pastor out of his Christianity, like it would be a huge win for me. Debating a pastor out of his faith.
Yeah.
I mean, a notch on my atheist belt, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I brought up my questions to him, and he answered some of them, but a lot of the questions he said, I don't know, that's a good question. I have never heard that before. And at the end of the meeting, Rihanna and I stand up, and she had already shared her kind of story and how she wanted to become a member of the church. And Pastor Dave and Amy, his wife, they hugged Rihanna and said, we'd love to offer you membership to the church. And then Pastor Dave shook my hand and he said, you know what, Jon, we have enough members right now. Thanks for coming. Like, no thanks. Like, thank you, but no thank you. And that was really good. Like, a lot of people, when I share this detail, they think that was kind of mean, but it actually wasn't. It was the best thing that he could have done, because if Pastor David said, hey, you know what, Jon, like, you seem like a nice guy, you're a work in progress, we'd love to offer you membership, everything like that, my preconceived notions about Christians would have been kind of validated at that moment. I would have thought, like, you just want my butt in your seat and my buck in your coffer. You don't really care about me. You don't really care about the things that you say, because I'm completely opposite worldview wise of you. But he didn't do that. And I really appreciate that he didn't do that. But the key is that as he was shaking my hand, he kind of turned me around towards his bookshelf. And off of that bookshelf, he gave me a book on Christian apologetics. And I'd never heard of Christian apologetics. I had never read really any Christian apologetics. And he says, Jon, you know what? Like, you asked a lot of good questions. And I didn't answer a lot of them to your satisfaction, I can tell. But I think the beginnings to some of those answers I couldn't answer, the beginnings to some of those questions are in this book. And he gave it to me, and I read that thing cover to cover. And right around the same time, my future in-laws, they gave me a New Believers Bible. It's like, I used to have it behind me. It's a thick one that had like cornerstones, edited by Greg Laurie, New Living Translation. So it's an NLT, so it's super easy to read. And I read that cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, over the course of maybe 3 or 4 months. In the background, I was also continuing my study of Christian apologetics, hoping to disprove it ultimately. And after about 4 months, man, I came to the conclusion that Jesus was who and is who he says he was. And that was a huge problem for me as an atheist, obviously. And I came to the conclusion that something needs to change. Either reality needs to change, or I need to change my view of reality, because my worldview wasn't lining up with the way the world really is. And the nature of reality is one of the natures of it is that reality doesn't change according to my personal preferences. I learned that early on, and we all learned that. And so that means my worldview had to change. And then I ended up becoming a Christian, and that came through different bumps in the reality, but then also studying the resurrection and other things, reading the Bible. And so that's like my story in kind of a nutshell, so to speak.
Yeah. So as you began to study apologetics and look into it from a historical point of view and a textual point of view, I found that most people, if they're honest with themselves, they do come to that conclusion that, hey, wow, I didn't know some of this stuff. This is really real.
Yeah. One of the things that points out that stands out to me is during the course of kind of my journey here, especially having to do with the Bible, I always dismissed the Bible as a bunch of Bronze Age myths. That's what I would have told you. It's an antiquated book, has very little place in modernity. Maybe we could take out some of the good moral principles that come out, like don't steal, right? Don't murder. But it's all myths. And it's like any other myth. It's like reading about Zeus or Thor. But I had never, two things here. One is I had never actually read the Bible, like large portions of the Bible. And when I started reading the Bible, I realized, wait, this isn't just one book. This is 66 separate books across a variable of genres, written by everything from kings to fishermen, and so a diverse authorship, yet it tells one unified story. And then it read like it was true. And then I compared that to like when I read things about Zeus and Thor and all these more mythical stories, it didn't have the same feel. It didn't read like it was actually history. It read like it was myth. And the Bible wasn't that way. So as I'm reading the Bible, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, oh my gosh, like this stuff is the authors actually intended at least this to be true. Now that's different than it actually being true. But the authors, when they were writing it, they weren't intending to write myth, right? They weren't writing fairy tales, right? Fairy tales start like a long time ago in a galaxy far away, right? That's Star Wars. Or there once lived the prettiest creature who ever did live. That's Little Red Riding Hood. Or once upon a time. These are the way myths begin. The Bible doesn't begin like that. The Bible begins in every book reads like it's trying to report history, and that stood out to me as wow, okay, what's going on here? And like I said, that doesn't mean it's history. There's some work you got to do, but at least the authors intended it to be history, and that stood out to me as I was reading it. That direct encounter with the Word of God, and of course, there's a spiritual thing that's going on inside as the Holy Spirit is churning my heart, my soul, right, making a heart of stone into a heart of flesh in the background there. But the God used Christian apologetics, New Testament, especially New Testament textual criticism, and the world around me, in combination with His Word, in order to help me see that the world is a certain way, and the best explanation for the way the world is Christian theism. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I think that's interesting. I've had a lot of people on the program, and it's amazing. As you said, you had really no prior knowledge of the Scripture. You were not steeped in Scripture. You weren't. But it's different people. Someone who has a master's degree, a PhD in English literature, and has no knowledge of the Scripture.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Yeah, they've read everything there is out there, but they have really no biblical knowledge.
That's Rosaria Butterfield's story, I think.
Yes.
I think she was a PhD in literature and never read the Bible, which is actually kind of insane to me, because the Bible, whether you believe it or not, you have to admit it has a central place in the history of certainly Western civilization.
Yeah.
Even Eastern civilization, there's a central Bible. You have to look at it.
Yeah, if you take out, even if you said, okay, it's not inspired, John,
That's right.
just for the literature perspective alone, and the influence it's had on the world, not just our culture, but yeah. And then I think when you read it too, coming to the fact of whether it's true, when you see, like you were saying, it just resonated like they believed it. When you see that those authors or men that they were writing, they put their life on the line. They weren't just going down the street to go to a Sunday school class. Many of them, as you read in Hebrews 11, many of them gave their life for the faith.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important point, that the saying that I've always heard is martyrs make bad liars. Or liars make bad martyrs. It's the reverse. Liars make bad martyrs, because people don't die for what they know to be false. And every one of the disciples died for what they knew to be, what they said to be true. Now, again, I'm not saying that just because they say it's true, but people don't like die for what they know to be false. It's not how we work. I mean, people die for maybe what they think is true that might be false. But these were eyewitnesses. They knew Jesus. They walked with Jesus. They spent time with Jesus. They saw Jesus die, and then they saw him rise again. And that was their claim, and they were willing to die for it. If Jesus hadn't been raised, I don't see any reason why any of the disciples, or certainly his core guys, would have gone to the grave defending that premise. It just doesn't make any sense. They didn't gain from it, I guess is what I'm saying. They didn't gain any power, money, sex, anything that they would that you think that they would be gained, they didn't gain, and all they did is lost. especially when you start calculating in Paul, who literally was at like the pinnacle of his career, Pharisee among Pharisees, right? He had it all put together. He had money, power, fame, and he gave that all up. Why? Well, because he had an encounter with Jesus that changed him forever, and he was willing to die for it. So I think that's an important point to bring up. And again, this stuff comes through when you read it. When you read the New Testament, when you read the testimony of these eyewitnesses, they read like they're true, like they're true stories of reality.
Yeah, a lot of conviction there that they had.
Certainly.
Yeah. So now you're with Stand to Reason. Kudos for that. That's got to be a great gig. As a believer now, when you're dealing with atheists and people from that, what are some pointers you might be able to give to speaking with them?
Yeah, sure. So when I'm talking to people who believe like I used to believe, I like to ask questions. Like you were just before we got on together, started recording, you had held up your reading Tactics by Greg Koukl. This is a great book that lays out a great game plan on how to converse on spiritual things without feeling pressure or even really having to know all that much. So it gives you confidence to have these types of discussions. But I like to point things out as well, and share kind of my story. As I was digging into naturalism and realizing that the world was a certain way, and my naturalism couldn't handle or couldn't answer certain pieces of reality, right? One of them would be stuff, like where the stuff exists, right? This isn't controversial. It's not complicated. Stuff exists. It's all around me. It's all around you. We're sitting in chairs. We're talking in microphones in front of computers and cameras. These exist. Where'd all the stuff come from? And then more fundamentally is what caused the beginning of the universe, right? So this is a different way to state the Kalam cosmological argument. It's that's just fancy words for where'd the stuff come from. And as an atheist, I came to the conclusion that this is not only is it not controversial, it's not complicated because there's only two possible answers, right? Either all the stuff came from something or all the stuff came from nothing. And as an atheist, this put me in a very difficult position because I didn't want to say something caused the beginning of the universe, because the moment I said something caused the beginning of the universe, that something has to take on certain qualities that are true about it. It has to be incredibly powerful, immensely creative, right? It has to be outside of its own creation. It has to be outside time and space. And the more you look into it, the more that something starts to look like something specific. It starts to look like God. And I did not want to say God. So instead, I opted, of course, for the nothing option. But I quickly came to realize, who in his right mind can say nothing caused everything, right? Because out of nothing, nothing comes. This is a fundamental principle that we live life by every single day. I mean, I was just stuck in a ton of traffic, right? And getting here, I was a couple minutes late to meet you on this Zoom meeting, and as I'm driving, I realized, okay, there's a ton of traffic. There must have been an accident. I didn't think, oh well, this traffic just appeared out of nowhere. It's not like all of a sudden these cars just appeared. No, there's a accumulation of cars because of something, excuse me. I mean, could you imagine living in a world where you're driving down, I live here in Southern California, driving down the 101 on the coast here. And could you imagine a world where all of a sudden like a cow just like pops into existence out of nothing? You'd slam right into it and be such a mess. Or taking it a step further, I mean, that's kind of a silly example, but if stuff came from nothing, science itself would be impossible. So think about, like, when we observe the heavens above, the stars and the galaxies. I mean, I'm seeing some of these pictures coming back from this new telescope that's up in space, that's shooting out into the deepest parts of space, and they're awe-inspiring. But if stuff just popped into existence out of nothing, we wouldn't be able to rely on any of that information. It would just, things would come in and we'd see it all the time. Or or on a, that's far out there, but close to us. If we're observing stuff in a petri dish, through a microscope, if stuff's just coming into and out of existence, it would make studying these things absolutely impossible. It makes the observation process that's critical to the scientific method would be impossible. So this is one of the things I wrestled with. So I couldn't say nothing. I wanted to say nothing, but I couldn't. So I had to say something. And the thing with the something option, something caused the beginning of the universe. It actually lines up with our basic intuitions about reality. We know that stuff comes from somewhere. And then not only that, like my atheism, my naturalism, it couldn't explain where everything came from, because at the beginning, all you had to start with is nothing. But on Christian theism, you have more than nothing. You have an uncaused cause. And so that's like one of the, if I'm talking to an atheist, I'm gonna bring that up, and it's usually gonna come in the form of a question. And I'm gonna say, hey, where'd everything come from on your worldview?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the multiverse. No, that's part of everything. Where'd the multiverse come from? Because there has to be a first cause, in order for everything to be here now. And it couldn't be in infinity past, because we're here at this moment. So I would bring these things up to the atheist. That's just one, that's one of my favorites, because it's fun to talk about, to be honest with you. I enjoy talking about science stuff. Another point of contention for me, at least, I bumped into the reality of a moral depth to the world. This bump really hurt.
Yeah.
It's the most difficult bump for me. It's the most difficult one for me now, and it was when I was an atheist. Like if you and I were talking, Ken, I would have agreed that certain things were bad. The suicide of a 12-year-old girl, I know, is wrong. It's not good. The death of a father of 4 in a car accident. What happens behind the gates of Auschwitz, the rape of Nanking, like all of these things, I would say were bad. But what was I saying when they were bad? I was saying they were actually wicked. I was saying what happened in the furnaces of Auschwitz ought not happen. And what am I saying? Am I saying that I don't agree with those things, or am I saying that there's actually something fundamentally wrong? You see, and I started to realize that I was appealing, in order for me to raise, this is known as the problem of evil, right? This is supposed to be, for me, at least as an atheist, this was the nail in God's coffin.
Mm-hmm.
This was my coup de grace, so to speak. But actually, what I realized is, once I started looking into it, the problem of evil, the problem of pain and suffering, actually isn't a problem for the Christian at all. It's a problem actually for the atheist. You see, everybody has to explain the existence of evil and suffering. Everybody. So getting rid of God doesn't get rid of the problem. It only gets rid of one of the possible solutions. And then I started thinking about it and started realizing through my reading and studying and just being honest and introspection, realizing if in order for me, and this is really important, in order for me to even bring the problem of evil up as a naturalist, as an atheist, I had to be appealing to an objective standard.
Yeah.
Where'd that objective standard come from?
Mm-hmm.
Like what objective standard, right? I like to equate it to bowling. I'm an awful bowler. I just brought my kids. I've got 4 little girls. I've got 4 daughters from 13 down to 6, and I brought them bowling about 2 months ago for the first time. And I think my 13-year-old did better than me. And but how do we know she did better than me? Well, because we have a scoring system. Yeah. Right? The closer you get to 300 in bowling, the better the bowler you are, at least the better round you've had. And the further away from 300, the worse you are. Well, the same thing is true about the existence of a moral depth to reality. The closer we are to the standard of perfection, which is Jesus, by the way, the better person you are. The further away you are, the worse person you are. And it's an objective standard I'm appealing to. But I don't have an objective standard on atheism. All I have is myself. So I'm a relativist ultimately. And then also you ask the question, where did the objective standard come from? Because a moral law needs a moral lawgiver. And just like a big bang with the Big Bang cosmology, a big bang needs a big banger. A moral law needs a moral lawgiver. And on atheism, again, all I'm left with is myself. And I'm the master of my own ship. But the world around me was clearly not that way. And I had to justify that. I had to reconcile that, and it led me to question my naturalism. One of the two turning for me, there were two turning points as a naturalist. And one was this third bump in the reality is what I call the bump of me, which is the existence of the soul. I think as Christians, we often don't talk enough about the soul. And then the second one was the resurrection of Jesus. So one is based in the science of history, and one is based in philosophy. And when I started realizing that everything had to come from somewhere or someone, and there was a moral depth to reality that existed according to a standard that's outside of myself, and then you combine that with the existence of an immaterial aspect of our being, the soul, right? The soul is that thing that you're constantly aware of every waking moment. Like every moment that you're awake, you're aware of. It's that thing that you introspect to. It's actually a pretty incredible thing when you think about it. Like even now, as I'm speaking out loud these words, I'm thinking in my mind, processing them, but I'm thinking of other things. And oftentimes that's your soul, right? We call it our mind, sometimes our consciousness, in order to maybe sometimes avoid spiritual connotations or whatnot. But that's our soul. And I can prove that our soul is real. You know, it's real. Like I ask, usually if I'm speaking to students, I speak to a lot of students or even adults, just to have fun. I'll say, have you ever had a song stuck in your head? You know, we all have. We have that song that's stuck in our head. And if I want to get that song out of your head, Ken, do I crack open your skull and separate your brain and extract the song? No, of course not, because that's not how you do it. It doesn't exist. It manifests itself in a physical realm. It's not physical. It's immaterial, and it's in your soul. That's where it is. And so souls are real, and we know that. But not only are souls real, souls are special. You see, as an atheist, I knew people were special, and we ought not violate them. And the difference is I didn't know what that special thing was, what made us special, because on naturalism, all we are is meat suits in motion. We're a random quantification of molecules bumping into each other. No rhyme or reason. Even the atheist authors I read, Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan says that life is solitary, poor, brutish, and nasty. Right? Richard Dawkins says that there's nothing but pitiless indifference. William Provine said before he died, Cornell professor, said that there's no ultimate foundation for meaning and ethics on an evolutionary perspective, from a Darwinian perspective. You know, and that's what I held. But I knew that these things weren't true because I had a soul that was testifying to the opposite. I knew people were special, and it's not because of any extrinsic value we hold, right? My wife is short, I'm tall. My wife isn't less valuable because she's short. You know, people aren't less valuable according to what country they're from, or what language they speak, or what color eyes, or how much hair they have, or any other what is it, any other extrinsic quality. Then what is it that makes people special? Why is this random quantification of molecules as special as this random quantification of molecules? Well, that's because we're all made in the image of God. Yeah. And I call that the great equalizer. You know, we are all equal. Why are we all equal? Well, because we're made in the image of God, and it's the only standard. We all have a special soul. Our soul is that thing that's special ultimately, right? But not only are souls real, and not only are souls special, souls are broken. And this was a major struggle for me. I knew in unguarded moments, I knew that I was broken and in desperate need of a rescue. I knew that I wasn't just a victim. I cried out with the problem of evil and suffering. I'm a victim, but not only am I a victim, I'm a victimizer. And I can't limit the impact of my own, what we call in the Bible is sin, my own sin. I can't limit the impact of my own sin just to myself. My sin was affecting the people around me, and I needed forgiveness. And on naturalism, there's no true offer of forgiveness. There's no reason to pursue justice. There's no reason to look to make the world better, so to speak. So I was confronted with that reality that our souls are real, our souls are special, but our souls are broken. And Christian theism, naturalism has no offer of forgiveness, but Christian theism does through Christ, which then led me to pursue Jesus, the historical Jesus. And through reading the Bible and then also reading Christian apologetics and atheists like Bart Ehrman and other informed folks, I realized that there are a lot of things that we can know about the person of Jesus. We know things, and historians agree to certain aspects, not everything, but certain fundamental aspects of his life. He lived, is a surety. He died on a Roman cross. He had followers. There was an empty tomb. He was buried in the tomb. The disciples had what they believed to be an actual encounter with a risen Jesus. These are all historical events that almost every scholar, regardless of worldview, agrees to. Now we need to come up with a hypothesis to explain all of these pieces of evidence, if it were. And so the hypothesis, I remember sitting in a chair. I used to own this white IKEA couch. It was like the most uncomfortable thing ever. So I used to sit in it to read because I couldn't fall asleep in the stinking thing. It was awful. And I remember sitting there reading the Bible, and then I had a Christian apologetic book open next to it, and I'm trying to like figure stuff out. And I remember thinking, you know what? I know what happened, because I was trying to avoid Jesus, right? It's like the bump of stuff. It's like, where'd all the stuff come from? I want to say nothing, because I want to avoid the implications, my personal implications of having it be something. So I'm trying to avoid the personal implications of God having raised Jesus from the dead. So I'm sitting there, okay, know what happened is aliens came and they took Jesus, who was dead in the tomb, and they used their, super advanced futuristic medical technology and repaired Jesus right then and there and placed him out there. And that explains it all, But then I remember thinking, I'm cooked. Like, if I'm willing to say Jesus, I'm willing to say, aliens, I'm willing to say anything.
Sure.
And why is that? And that's where really rubber hit the road for me, is I realized that if I was just being honest, I'm not saying this is true of everybody who's an atheist or a naturalist. That it was for me, though, that I didn't want God to exist, because I knew if God existed, there were real world implications for my life. I loved my sin. I loved my life before Jesus. It's not like I didn't hit rock bottom and was left with nothing. I was pursuing a legal career at some of the best law firms in the world, working on amazing cases, rubbing elbows with famous people and making a ton of money and doing what I wanted when I wanted with whom I wanted. I was living the life in Hollywood. I was having a good time. So I realized that if God existed, things would have to change for me. And that was one of the motivations to kind of push God off. But then when I was confronted with, okay, reality is a certain way, it doesn't bend and contort to my desires, wants, likes, dislikes. And then I combined that with, oh my gosh, Jesus is who he says he is. Dude.
That's a game changer there.
This is the news that changes the world. Yes. Right? It still does. It changed the world 2,000 years ago. It still changes the world. It changes the hearts and minds of people every single day, which is incredible, And it's what I like to stress is it's true. Like, I'm not like overly emotional. I didn't lean into my emotion. It didn't gain me anything, certainly fame or money. I made a lot more money at the law firm. Trust me, I believe what I believe because it's true. I believe that in Christianity because it's the true story of reality. Do I still have doubts and struggles? Of course I do. I can't explain everything, but as far as the world around me, as I'm bumping into reality, Christianity gives me the best reasons for why the world is the way that it is. It's true. Yeah. And I think that's important for us to understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems like culture doesn't want the truth.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think the culture wants to be left alone to oftentimes, and we fall into this too, if we're honest, Ken, like we fall into this too. We kind of want to be left alone sometimes, right? To our own devices, right? And this is exactly what God has done, right? Romans 1.
Romans 1.
Romans 1, right? Everybody is without excuse. When we look out, the things that are seen and the things that are unseen testify to the nature and the reality of God.
Sure.
And what we do is we suppress, pre-Jesus, is we suppress the truth and unrighteousness in pursuit of our own lustly desires. And God says, here you go. Have at it. You know, and then when I just spoke to I taught a class at a local Christian high school here in my neck of the woods, and I was speaking on the existence of hell yesterday to them. And this isn't like my topic, right? Actually, I stand on the shoulders of a colleague of mine, Ravi Lashua, who he speaks on hell more than I do. And so I was taking some of his information, and it's important to understand that I think that, you know, God has given us exactly what we want, you know, pre-Jesus.
Yeah.
And that he gives us over to ourselves. And then when we look at the world and we realize that it's messed up, well, that's why, because we're corrupted people, and corrupted people produce corrupted situations, and corrupted situations produce a corrupted world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we're to blame, not God. So oftentimes when we talk about hell, or we talk about the existence of suffering, like, we're the ones that messed it all up. God created everything perfect, you know, and God's just given us kind of like what we want. and then we meet Jesus, and then we have a transformation, and then we ought to be pursuing righteousness to the best of our ability. But yeah, that's just an aside for what it's worth.
That's that little thing called free will, isn't it?
It rears its head up, man. It oftentimes does. We also oftentimes, I mean, this is taking the conversation to a different direction, but one of the things I really loved about, I still love about the Christian worldview is it offers it not only offers it not only includes suffering and evil, right? It's a central part of our story, but it explains it, but it also gives us a solution, right? Oftentimes what's God doing? Why is there so much evil? Well, God's already solved the problem of evil, and he did it in Christ on a cross at Calvary, right? The Satan is his footstool. Jesus is already a conqueror, you know, and now it's just waiting for God to kind of finish everything out, so to speak. You know, the story's not over yet, but in a very real way, the conclusion's already been written.
Sure.
And oftentimes we cry out, you know, what, God, come back now. I don't know about you, Ken, but my family, I'm the only Christian. My brother, my sister, my mom, they don't believe. And this always hits me home when I pray that God would come back quick, but not too quick, right? Because if God were to come back at 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. tonight, right there in the morning, where would some of the people that I love most in this world, where would they be at 12:01? You know, so I find myself thanking God for him not to be coming back right now. And thank you that you're patient and long suffering, you know, because there's still work that needs to be done in the hearts and the minds of people that I love dearly. And every day that you're giving us a new grace, a new opportunity to share the love of Christ, to share the gospel, the good news, that we don't have to be dead in our trespasses and sins, but we can be born again through the work of the cross. So so oftentimes we don't understand that, like, yes, there's evil and suffering in the world, but if it got rid of, if God got rid of it all right now, where would some of the people that we love dearly be? So I kind of like that God's patient, not just with me, but with the people that I love.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah. This is another example, Ken, of the Christian story showing to be the true story, right? I mean, on naturalism, why pain and suffering? On naturalism, we should do everything we can to avoid pain and suffering, and that means even at the cost of inflicting pain and suffering. And this isn't just me. I'm reading this book, Homo Deus. I think the author's last name is Harari. I can't remember it off the top of my mind. This is a naturalist, and these are the conclusions that he's coming to.
Sure.
And they're the natural outworkings of his worldview, right? And, you know, why not? If you have the resources, the means, the power, why not exploit the least of these in order to prolong your life or provide for a better life for your family? And I think that we should have honest conversations about this stuff, because if naturalism is true, if we're honest, I don't see a reason why that isn't the way the world should be,
Mm.
which puts puts a lot of people in some very, very hard, desperate situations, because you're going to have the haves surviving on the backs of the have-nots, which is the very thing actually that people, when you start talking about justice and stuff right now, people are objecting to. But it all comes out of worldviews. You look, the influence of our culture has been informed by naturalism, and these are the logical conclusions. These are the outworkings of a worldview. Worldviews have what is it? Ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims, is what John Stone Street says.
Mm.
And we're seeing it. So I kind of just threw a lot at you, Ken. I'm so sorry
No,
for your
no.
listeners.
Yeah. Well, I think on suffering too, as a Christian, you know, if you don't hold that worldview, your suffering is just meaningless. It's painful. It's the consequence. I mean, but in Christ, there's a purpose behind it all. God, just as Genesis 50:20, Joseph said to his brothers, "But as for you, you thought evil against me." I mean, my God, everything he went through, but God used it for good. And so, yeah, I mean, you and I are going to suffer, but the suffering, God has got a plan for that. God has a purpose for it. Craft us into the image of Christ to be more like him.
Yeah. And I love the story of actually Joseph, because he says that, right? And I'm hoping that your viewers here, they know the story of Joseph. If not, they should go and read the later chapters of Genesis. And read about Joseph, because this is a man who knew what suffering was. He was a favorite of his father, right? And then his brothers got jealous. They sold him into slavery, said that he was dead, all but forgotten. A slave in a strange land, rises through the ranks in order to become an influencer, only to be accused of adultery with Potiphar's wife, right? Falsely accused,
Yeah.
thrown back into the bottom of the pile, right? Only to grind it back up to the top. And then he's there, and Israel's about to starve because famine is hitting the land. But Joseph's obedient, because he listens to God and he stores up food, right? He sees this coming, through the vision of it was a vision of the Pharaoh that he interpreted, and knew that this famine was going to come. So he's preparing for it. And then he's faced with his brothers who sold him out however many years before. They didn't recognize him. So it's been a long time. And then he realizes, like, he tells them who he is. And he tells them, hey, you know what? The suffering that I went through, it's meant for good. What you meant for evil is God's going to use for good. And then he says, why? He says, the suffering that I went through is going to be meant for good. And that good is the salvation, like the furtherment of a people group. Like, they were going to die. Israel was going to die from starvation. But because Joseph went through those trials, he was in this position to save this entire people group. Oftentimes, the reason why I belabor this point is because oftentimes as Christians, as just people, not just Christians, we look up at the sky and cry, why, God?
Yeah.
Get me out of this place of suffering. And sometimes I think we fall into a trap. And that's the understanding of our suffering as being kind of like from God, and God's kind of punishing us through it. Or maybe he's just like this far off, like sky daddy that created you and doesn't really care about you. Or even worse, maybe now he becomes this angry sky daddy that's waiting for you to mess up so he can punish you. And that's not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible even uses our suffering to produce things in us, right? These are but momentary light afflictions, producing in us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison, is what Paul says. Paul, another guy who knew what suffering was intimately. And he says that the suffering, right, they're momentary. The sufferings that with the tribulations, they're momentary. This too shall pass is the saying that we use now. It's not very helpful. Like, if you're wrestling with something that's super, super tragic in your life, and I come up and I say, oh, this too shall pass, it's like, oh my gosh, that's not helpful at all. It's true though, especially on a heavenly divine timeline. But notice that Paul says something that's really profound. And when I realized this, my prayer life changed. Paul there, he says that these are momentary, but the momentary light afflictions, they're producing in us something that otherwise wouldn't be there. So the trials and the tribulations are producing something in us that we need. As we look to the glory that awaits us, we need to be built up. We need to be matured And the way that we're matured oftentimes is through suffering. And we don't like to face that reality, but that's how the world is. Like, a person who wants the bodybuilder gets in shape, they subject their body to a certain amount of trauma, violence. Even they rip muscles, and while they're working out to build bigger muscles. If you want to go get in shape, you've got to go run, and running, in my opinion, is awful. But this is a suffering that you've got to endure to better to produce something, an endurance thing. It's the same thing with the sufferings that we go through in our day-to-day life, even immense, even awful sufferings, because Paul had that in his past, even when he wrote that. So even the awful things of life, God uses for our benefit, ultimately producing in us the eternal weight of glory. I mean, you and me, Ken, we're brothers brought together not by our own DNA, not by our own blood, but by the blood of Christ. And having been brought together by Christ, we've been adopted into his family. And that means that everything that's Christ's is ours because we're co-heirs with him. And God has literally gifted us. The Father has literally gifted us everything that he gifted to Jesus, which is everything. All of creation we're charged with stewarding. And in the new creation, right, the new heaven, the new earth, we're going to be given charge of angels even, which is like beyond me. I know right now, if you put me in that context, I would screw things up again. Like, I don't want to mess things up again.
Yeah.
And so, but we're subjected to this suffering this time right here, pre-heaven, pre-glory, in my conviction, so that when we get to heaven, we can bear the burden of glory, but then we can rule and reign in an appropriate way, never wanting to get back to this broken spot. This kind of speaks to the objection, like, oh, well, can you sin in heaven? Well, yeah, you can sin in heaven, but you're not going to want to, because you're going to have lived through a life, hopefully, Lord willing, a long life here on earth, this side of glory, suffering. And when we get there and we experience bliss, we're going to be like, I'm not going back there. I know what that is. I'm going forward. I'm going to live in glory. So again, I just kind of threw it all up on you. Sorry.
So I think it's what did C.S. Lewis say? He said that God whispers to us in our good times. I'm paraphrasing here, but suffering is his, get a tool to get our attention, megaphone or
Megaphone. He says,
megaphone.
he says, God whispers to us in our pleasures,
Yeah.
but shouts to us on our pains.
Mm.
It's God's megaphone to arouse a deaf world.
Mm.
I mean, think about, and when I speak on the problem of evil, oftentimes I make this point. Think of what it would be like if we didn't feel pain. For example, CIPA disease, CIPA disease. It's an acronym. I can't say it, the medical term, because I'm not that smart. But CIPA disease is this disease that people have that they can't feel pain. So, like, if you have this, you could fall down and break your arm and not ever know it. Or you could lean against a burning stove and not know it until your flesh is completely melted off. The people who wrestle with this would give anything to feel pain. And this is the thing oftentimes we seek so desperately to escape. I'm not saying we pursue pain and confuse it with pleasure. That's not like we don't need to sit there and be flogging ourselves. That's not what we do. But then when I said that, my prayer life changed when I really sat with Paul's words, not just there, but all of Paul's life, when the way that he writes, my prayer life changed, because I used to pray or find myself praying, Lord, take this from me, Lord, alleviate me, get me out of the situation. Well, I still pray for that, but I start by saying, Lord, don't do it too quickly. Allow me to glean, to learn, to grow how you want me to grow in the midst of my suffering. Lord, don't allow me to escape this without gaining what you want me to gain. Because we're told that tribulation produces perseverance, proven character, hope, and a hope that does not disappoint. So right there in that chain of like three things, you go from from tribulation, the trials of life, to a hope that does not disappoint. And so it starts with tribulation, but it produces first long suffering, patience, perseverance. You got to learn how to persevere through your trials. This is something we as parents know well as we teach our kids. My kids, they come home and complain that a class is hard. My response isn't, okay, well, we'll just get you out of the class then. No, my response is, you got to work hard. You got to persevere. Why? not just for perseverance sake. It's because I know that as they persevere through hard things, it's going to build them as people into people that I want to see, that I want to reproduce, that I want to be around, people of character. It's like the difference between the green recruit and the veteran that's been tried and true through a career of military service. You know, you start out one way, but because of the trials and perseverance through them, you become a person of character. And then that leads all the way down to producing in us a hope that doesn't disappoint ultimately. So we got to remember that our trials are for a reason.
Yeah, I don't know of any Christian that has gone through a difficult situation in their life. Most of them would say, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I'm talking about some bad stuff, not, oh,
Certainly.
I've got a cold or I stumped my toe. I'm talking about, going through cancer treatments or, almost dying from COVID or all these different things that were just in the moment,
Yeah.
one breath away from death. And God brought them through it. And God brought them through it in such a way now that they're just a spiritual dynamo, just on fire for the Lord, and such an appreciation for life and the things of God. They're different people.
Yeah. There is a difference. It's funny because as a naturalist, as an atheist, one of the things I would have said is the reason why you believe what you believe as a Christian is to bring you comfort. And there's a part of that's true,
Yeah.
right? Being a Christian does give me comfort. It does give me hope, but that's not the only reason I believe.
Yeah.
It gives me hope and it gives me comfort because it's true, right?
Mhm.
I'm not believing a lie. Believing lies, once you know that they're a lie, I would say that you don't do well. It doesn't bring comfort to believe them, even though it's a lie. Even though you know it's a lie. That's not what we do. Nobody likes being lied to. And so I would have said it's you believe that you're a Christian because, or you believe in Christianity because it gives you hope and comfort. Well, my Christian worldview does give me hope and comfort, but that's not why I believe it. It's a byproduct of it being true. And then I'd ask the atheist, like, you begin this conversation kind of by asking, like, how do you converse with people? I'd ask the atheist, where are you getting your hope from? Where? Because what the world has to offer you it is yourself. So you got to derive hope. Ultimately, I think naturalism, it seems to me, is at bottom a materialistic, narcissistic view of reality. All you have is yourself. So that means if you fail at something, you just got to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. More effort, more money, more sex, more power, more education. Well, what happens when you fail? Well, the same thing, and ultimately, it leads, I think, to despair. And that's one of the reasons you mentioned at the onset that I speak on suicide a lot. And that's why I think one of the reasons that we've seen these drastic spikes in suicide rates is because ideas have consequences. And as we become more and more influenced by naturalism, we drive people into themselves for hope and for satisfaction. And all we have is ourselves when we turn into ourselves. And I don't need more of me. I need something outside of me. And I'm not saying I want this. I'm saying this is what we need if we want to live a hope-filled life. Because if we continue the cycle of pulling yourself up by our own bootstraps, we get exhausted, and that's not the way the world ought to be. It's not the way the world is. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, that scripture, I think it says they're without God and without hope in the world.
Yes.
And so it to me, it doesn't come as a surprise at all to see, as a result of the way the culture is heading and the beliefs that they're adapting, it seems like we're just on a accelerated, decline. And people are, apart from the Christian faith and hope, people are hopeless.
100%. And yeah, the Christian message is a message of hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you find yourself without hope, turn to Christ. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's good.
Yeah. Now about it, faith, hope, and love.
Amen.
Hang on to those, brother.
That's right. That's right, Ken.
Well, I know, John, let's jump around here a little bit. I know you speak on a lot of different topics, like we talked about suicide and you're right in the mix, and that's one of the things I really like about Stand to Reason. Folks go to Stand to Reason, their website, check out some of John's articles, his videos. They're fantastic. But yeah, so let's hit on a few of these things, John.
Sure.
Wow, what about you see nowadays just the sexualization of children in our culture? I mean, my goodness, things. I mean, I'm talking about cartoons now
Yeah.
that were so innocent in the time, and yeah, maybe speak to that about what you see going on in Hollywood with Disney and the whole bunch, Netflix and all that stuff. It's just
The this became clear to me not too long ago. I was watching. We had a number of friends over our house. I think 3 or 4 different families and kids all around kind of the same age. And one of my kids used to watch this show called Blue's Clues. This is and
I used to watch that with my daughter. Yeah, and it was
yeah,
perfectly fine.
good show. I mean, I watched it with all my kids. It's a blue dog that's blue. His name's Blue, and there's a human like owner, and they play games together and they solve mysteries with these questions. It's a good show. And like even just having to discuss this in this context is kind of not embarrassing, but just like, where are we going? Because this is an animated show. It's Blue's Clues. And my kids put it on, and one of my friends says, "Oh, you probably should like not watch that anymore." I'm like, "Oh, well, why?" Like we Christians sometimes hop on bandwagons, right? And like, oh, boycott this because of whatever. Okay. Well, he said we should really watch this episode, and he sent me a link. And the link of this episode, this is Blue's Clues. You can go watch it now, I'm sure, on Netflix, whatever platform it's on. It's a cartoon geared towards 2 years old to 5 years old. Okay, let's put it in perspective, 2 to 5. And they had a family pride parade where the master of ceremonies, or the person leading the parade, was a drag queen. So it was a man dressed like a woman. And the voiceover of the cartoon was this drag queen. It's a famous drag queen. I don't know their name. And then there was a song sung to the tune of "The ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah." Like, so it's a very catchy tune. Well, the family comes marching one by one, and then it would show the type of families, all the different types of families. One mom, uh, one trans dad, 3 kids, 2 moms, no kids, 2 dads, 5 kids, one trans mom, one trans dad, 2 kids, or whatever. And the very last float, this is through the whole thing. They go through all the different combinations of types of families that we can have, minus, at least I don't remember, as I sit here today, I don't remember them highlighting a traditional mom, dad, kids family. And the very last float, there's a beaver. I can't, like, even just saying this stuff is just like outlandish. It's like a blue or a purple beaver, if I remember correctly. And on this beaver, it didn't have shirt on. The beaver had chest scars because the beaver had had a double mastectomy. It had its breasts removed. At least that's what this is a beaver geared towards 2 to 5 year olds. And I remember watching it being like, that did I see that? And I rewound it and paused it, and I saw this, and I'm like, is that intentional? So then I looked it up, of course, on the internet and Googled it. And yes, this was intentional. This was there to represent a child who had transitioned, a girl who wanted to transition to be a boy. And these are the things that Netflix or whatever platform, whoever's the producer, this is what Blue's Clues wants to communicate to our children. I just read an article. There's a local newspaper here called The Guardian. There's something going on in our community up in Thousand Oaks. It's Ventura County here, where there's a child. This is breaking news. There's a child who's wanting to transition without their parents' knowledge. And this child has gone to the teachers, and the teachers are supporting this child to transition without telling the parents. Well, the parents found out and they're furious, right? Well, now it's starting to come out. The teachers signed non-disclosure agreements, and they took legal action so they could protect is the word that they use these children. There's a few things here. One, we're targeting our children and
We
we're
are.
experimenting on them.
Yeah.
This is not good.
That's
Uh,
evil.
I'm not even saying worldview wise. I'm not even saying like what's right and what's wrong. I'm not even addressing the transgender issue. What I'm saying is that minors in school can't take an aspirin without parental consent.
Mhm.
Yet we're allowing them to go to their teachers and obtain medications that castrate them, medications that stop puberty, and ultimately, possibly, surgery. That and once you do these things, there's a myth out there that they're reversible. No, no, no. Once you block puberty, you're done.
Mhm.
It's not like you can't rewind the clock. And we don't even know what the actual outcomes of these things are.
Sure.
And so as somebody who speaks on suicide, you look in the trans community, we're looking at a 60% suicide rate.
Mm.
60% suicide rate. And it's not just because of cultural pressures. It's not just because of condemnation or persecution or these things. It's because people are chasing answers to problems in very dark and wrong places, and then the results are catastrophic, and we're going younger and younger and younger and younger, and it's
Mm.
it's it's a really bad situation. Fortunately, I think we see I'm an optimist. I see a light at the end of this tunnel here, this dark tunnel.
Mhm.
I uh I think that as we get closer to its absurdity, men becoming women and all of this stuff, we're going to start seeing. I'm hoping we're going to start seeing a lot of lawsuits popping up, and I think that all this stuff is going to come out in the courts because I see biologists, secular biologists, now lining up with conservative Christians and these views, showing the detrimental effects that this stuff is having mentally and physically on not just our children but also on the culture. So I see a light at the end of this tunnel, but it's going to come at the cost of our children. And this is it's moral insanity. I mean, we're not even talking about that. It's moral insanity, and biological insanity.
Yeah. And it's an agenda too. It's an agenda. This is not something they just popped up one network's doing this. I mean, this is across the board. And I know I had a guest from Canada on the show, Dr. Aaron Rock, a pastor in Canada, and it got around to some of the things that are going on in Canada, and I forget the bill or whatever, but there's a bill. But I asked him, I said, are you telling me, I'm a counselor in the school, and as we've discussed, as you're sharing, that if this child comes to me and is confused, okay, I'm confused, Ken, I'm confused, John, and that if I was to counsel them from a biblical perspective,
Yeah,
that I would lose my job. And Dr.
go to
Rock
jail.
said, you would not only lose your job, you could potentially be in prison for 10 years, Ken. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So California passed a bill very similar to that a few years back. I used to pastor a fairly large church in my community here before Stand to Reason. I still pastor, but a small church. And they passed this bill in California, very similar, that made it illegal ultimately, under the penalty of fine or jail time. If I had my wife, who is my wife, a mother of 4 children, if she came to me and said, uh, John, I am having same sex desires and I do not want them. I don't want them. Can you help? I cannot counsel her away from those desires. Meanwhile, the opposite is not true. If somebody comes and says, "Hey, I'm a man. I'm unhappy. Perhaps just leave it at that. I'm a man and I'm unhappy. I'm searching for something." A counselor is within their right to say, "Oh, well, maybe the reason why you're unhappy and what you're searching for is you're a woman, actually, just in the wrong body." I've seen this played out in a very real way here in Southern California. I received an email from a good friend of mine who was in touch with a woman who her daughter had died, tried to die by suicide, and very sad situation. And so they were wrestling with this, and the daughter got into some counseling. They went to the local school because it's free. The public school system offers free counseling. So she put her daughter in the free counseling. And after a couple weeks, the daughter came home convinced that the reason why she was discontent, the reason why she believed the lie that she'd been better off dead than alive, the reason why she was without hope was because she was actually a boy. So now this poor parent is wrestling with a child who wants to die and is convinced at the suggestion of a school counselor that she's actually a boy. And she's like, what do I do? What do I do here? And this is a huge problem. The Satan's a liar, right? So Jesus says that Satan came to lie, kill, and destroy, right? I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly, right? Jesus says that Satan is the father of lies. And right now in our culture, this is Satan's foothold. Satan uses lies and deceptions, and he's attacking the identity, especially of our youth.
Mm.
And without the firm understanding of who we are as people, I'm outside of worldview. Every time I talk on suicide, I always start with this. I say, I want to let you know that I'm here for you because I love you.
Yeah.
And I can say that and mean it because you're special, you're unique, and you're valuable. Why? Because you are made in the image of God. That's why. And the best thing about the image of God is, and this is what I say, is no matter what you believe about God is, you can't throw that image off of yourself. It's stuck on you.
Yeah.
And then I go from there. And that's like what we need to be doing is building our kids up in their true identity, whether they're Christian or not right now, right? I want them to know that they're worth something, that I see them, that I hear them, and that I love them because of no other reason other than that they're made in the image of God. And there's nothing that you can do. I'm going to love you regardless. I'm going to love you if you're trans. I'm going to love you if you're gay. I'm going to love you if you're straight. I'm going to love you if you're Christian, if you're atheist. But I'm going to love you because my worldview can bear that burden. You're made in the image of God. I'm not going to accept everything you say. There is a such thing as a bad idea. I don't have to accept your idea, but I am going to accept you as a person because you're made in the image of God. And then we can start talking about worldview stuff. But this is how Satan's attacking he's throwing these darts of lies, especially at our youth, and they're searching for identity. They don't know who they are. And then you intertwine in here the conversation of social media and the role that's playing, right? They're looking for their identity in how well Facebook's doing, or Twitter, or Instagram, or TikTok. Like, these are the things I don't even go on them most of the time anymore because I think they're cancer. But so we're looking for our teens are looking for the world to inform who they are instead of the truth of who they are according to the true story of reality, which is they're made in the image of God. And then once you start talking to Christians, it gets even better, right? Because not only are you made in the image of God, but you're a child of God who's made with intention and purpose, special and unique, called by name, used according to his master plan with a destiny of heavenly glory. And then that's where we find our identity. But right now, the culture is saying, you know what, like, you don't know who you are, you're lost. Well, why don't you try being a boy? Why
Yeah.
don't you try being a girl? Maybe you're gay. Maybe you're straight. Maybe you're asexual is a big one right now in my community, where we have teens that just don't want to have sex, like, ever. They have no attraction is what they say, so it's all, in my opinion, it's all identity stuff, Ken. That's the fundamental core. And that's where Satan seems to, he knows how to, he is, he's clever. He's crafty.
I think that's why really it's so important for what you're doing and for what Stand to Reason is doing. My goodness, I mean, parents, we have got to, I think the days are gone where we just have a pizza party for our youth. We need to be
Gone.
teaching them, man, we need to be teaching them some apologetics. We need to be teaching them some systematic theology. We don't need a little blow up house or balloon and for them to jump around in and slide down. They are so confronted in your face with these worldviews that are contrary to the scripture.
The I would say that it's that got us kind of into this position. the pizza party mentality,
Mm.
fun and games stuff. I love church. Like I said, I'm a pastor. I planted a church 4 years ago with my three best friends, and I love Sunday mornings. But on Sunday mornings, I think that this is important. Like, important thing. This is why church is important. It's important for us to go to church because
Yes.
something important happens at church. It's not just a time where we get to see our friends and enjoy fellowship and sing songs and hear good preaching and stuff. We actually, on Sunday mornings, we do battle with Satan.
Mm.
It is the one time of the week where the church corporate, the church worldwide gathers and we cry out to God and we do battle with Satan, and heaven and earth are moved on Sundays. And when what we've done is we've become segregated in our services, where we say, okay, well, our children, they can. I'm not saying youth ministry is bad. Like, that's not what I'm arguing. I'm just saying, like,
Mhm.
we've lost that perspective.
Yeah.
And the children, they need to have fun. They need to enjoy what church, and it needs to be a fun time for them, is what the perspective has been. And I think that there's been consequences to that mentality, and we're seeing that right now. Kids, the kids even in our churches, they actually don't know who they are.
When they go off to university and you see them lose their faith just like that,
Yeah.
it it's I think it's showing the weakness of what we've done as a church to train them up to be able to give an answer to their
Yeah,
faith, what they
100%.
believe.
Yeah,
Well, I appreciate, John, your time.
absolutely. This is great.